Graham, we're now live.
Welcome to the February meeting of the Executive Committee of Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes Fire Authority. I would like to start by confirming that this meeting is being live streamed on the Buckinghamshire Fire and Rescue Service YouTube channel. Following the meeting, a recording will continue to be available on this channel, and it is also being recorded should there be any technical difficulties. I'd just like to remind members of 4 key points. Please mute your microphone and turn off your camera when not speaking. Secondly, feel free to turn off incoming video, as this may help if you have a weak connection. Thirdly, if you wish to speak during the meeting, please turn on your camera to indicate a wish to ask a question or make a comment. The chairman will be notified of all members who have switched their videos on. When the chairman does invite you to speak, please unmute. Finally, when voting, members will be asked only to indicate if they wish to vote against or to abstain from a vote. Where this is the case, the chairman will ask you to switch on your camera to indicate that you wish to do so. These will be monitored and brought to the chairman's attention. If you do not switch on your video, this will be taken as silent assent. Before I hand over to the Vice Chairman, for the benefit of viewers of the webcast, Katie Ellis, the Democratic Services Officer, will read the list of members in surname alphabetical order. Please turn on your camera and unmute to respond when your name is called.
Thank you, Graham. Councillor Clark, we have apologies from Councillor Hall.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Hopkins.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Lambert. I don't think he's on yet.
Katie, Stephen Lambert's going to join us later. He's tied up on other business.
Okie dokie, thank you. Councillor Marland. I'm not sure he's joined us yet. Councillor McCall.
I'm here.
Thank you. Councillor McLean.
I'm also here.
Thank you. And Councillor Walsh.
Present.
Thank you.
Well, I'm not sure if you're waiting for me, Graham, but if that's the case, then can I just ask you again under agenda item 1 for apologies, please?
Yeah, Councillor Clark.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm sure the meeting would agree, we'd like to send our best wishes to Leslie and wish her a speedy recovery. I don't think it's, from what I gather, anything terribly serious, but she's under the weather this week. Hopefully we can catch up with her next week. And bear with me, everybody. I've come to this a little late, so we'll have to wing it a wee bit. Can we get to agenda item 2, the minutes? Can I ask members to approve the minutes of the meeting of the 18th of November 2020? And can I take members' comments on accuracy?
Chairman, no member has indicated a wish to speak. No member has indicated a wish to vote against or abstain. The signing of the minutes, I think we can take that as a resolution that's carried.
Thank you very much indeed. I'll deal with that with the team afterwards. Agenda item 3, disclosure of interest. Can I ask members to declare any disclosable pecuniary interests they may have in any matter being considered, which are not entered onto the authority register, and officers to disclose any interests they may have in any contract to be considered. Can I just start by declaring that since the last meeting, I've joined the board of the Milton Keynes Development Partnership. And I noticed the MKDP has, over the last 2 or 3 years, come up in conversations, etc. It's not specifically on the agenda today, but I just think for the record, it's important that I declare that. Are there any other declarations from anybody else?
No members has indicated anything, Chairman.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. Can I just make the note as well, of course, that members' allowances, which is item 9, does not require any member to declare an interest. Agenda item 4, questions. Graham.
Yes, we've got one question. I'll hand over to Graham to read the question.
Thank you, Vice Chairman. Yes, we do have a written question, and it's from Councillor David Hopkins. And the question that I received by email last week to be tabled at this meeting is to ask about the consequences / ramifications for the authority of a major incident being declared by the leader of Buckinghamshire Council in relation to COVID-19. And I understand Nick Osborne will be able to address the answer to that question.
Thanks, Graham. Thanks, Councillor Hopkins, for the question. In relation to the actual question itself and the wording of the question, just for members' awareness, the actual declaration of the major incident by Buckinghamshire was made by Buckinghamshire Place following a multi-agency meeting on the 30th of December. So it was a collaborative declaration of a major incident by Buckinghamshire Council at that point that then went through to the LRF. But just as a bit of background for members, it may be helpful, is that major incidents themselves are defined by the Civil Contingencies Act or within the Civil Contingencies Act. And the actual definition is an event or situation with a range of serious consequences which requires special arrangements to be implemented by one or more emergency responder agency. And an emergency responder agency could be any of category 1 or 2 responders, again, as defined in the Civil Contingencies Act, one of which is a local authority. Quite rightly, they come under category 1, as do all emergency services and so forth. So when looking at the actual question, what impacts did that have or could it have? Major incidents have been declared a number of times for a number of different types of circumstances. And again, just throughout COVID, back in March, a major incident was declared by the Local Resilience Forum for the whole of the Thames Valley area. And that stayed in place up until around August time, when obviously the first wave started to dissipate. And then the LRF moved to a position of major incident standby. But any of those category 1 responders can at any time declare a major incident. And in normal, sort of times, what that would precipitate is that a strategic coordinating group would be set up under the LRF to look at how partners come together to assist in dealing with that major incident that has gone beyond the scope and capacity of one or more of those emergency responder agencies. But because of the way that COVID was already being handled, there was already a battle rhythm, if you like, of how the strategic coordinating group and tactical coordinating groups came together anyway. And with one local authority then, declaring a major incident, that was reviewed by the strategic coordinating group the following day on the 31st of December. And it was agreed by all partners involved, from health, emergency services, local authorities and beyond, that actually the whole of the Thames Valley again had moved into that major incident status purely because of the demand that was being placed across the region on all responder agencies and the health systems. With regard to what additional support that can bring, what again it would have done was, what it did do was highlight that resources were very tight across the piece, but in one particular area, mutual aid can be requested through the strategic coordinating group and through the LRF structures, and a mutual aid cell has been set up. Additionally, any requests for military aid through the military aid to the civil authority arrangements can then be channeled through the Local Resilience Forum on behalf of any agency that is declaring that major incident. So obviously, major incidents come in many shapes and forms and sizes, and what may be a major incident for one emergency responding agency may not be for another. And an example of that could be, I attended an incident a couple of years ago that some members may remember on the M1, which was declared a major incident by the ambulance service. But for us as an organisation, as a fire authority, it wasn't a major incident. But of course, we came together as a partnership to resolve that major incident on behalf of the responder agency that called that. So in the broadest terms, as I say, the definition is an event or situation with a range of serious consequences which requires special arrangements to be implemented by one or more emergency responder agencies. And then within the Civil Contingencies Act, there are a number of other descriptors that kind of outlines what that could look like. And one of those that I think is quite important is that a major incident is beyond the scope of business as usual operations and is likely to involve serious harm, damage, disruption, or risk to human life or welfare, essential services, the environment, or national security. So they're some of the things that are taken into consideration by local authorities, emergency services, and other responders as and when they are declaring major incidents. I hope that's covered the question, but obviously I'm more than happy to take any questions or clarify any further points if required.
Thank you very much indeed. That is a very detailed response, so I'm very grateful to you for that. Can I just ask, were we able to draw down any additional resources, financial resources, from central government having declared a major incident? Does it sort of kick off additional support from the centre?
My understanding on that particular point in relation to this particular declaration was there weren't any additional resources that were drawn down through the LRF. Whether or not Buckinghamshire Council received any, I wouldn't be able to answer that question directly because I wouldn't have known that with our role within the LRF on that. So apologies for that, but I can try to find out.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Can I just ask as well, I think given the protocol, the Chief Fire Officer and Councillor Lambert, it's a joy to see you both, but I think when you're not speaking, can you turn off your cameras? Thank you. Does anybody else want to raise an issue to do with the major incident? No, in which case I'm going to move on then to agenda item 4A, which is Christmas floods. And I believe we have an update here from Dave Norris.
Good morning, Chairman. Good morning, members. Thank you very much for the question. Yes, I do have an update for you in relation to our role during the Christmas floods. I'll ask members at this point to cast their mind back to just before Christmas. It was the 23rd of December when a weather front moved in from the west, and predominantly it affected Berkshire and Oxfordshire in the early stages. And as the front developed through into Christmas Eve, it started to affect North Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes. And as you would probably expect, it started to cause an increase in activity for Thames Valley Fire Control, which of course covers Royal Berkshire, Oxfordshire and Buckinghamshire Fire and Rescue Services. And that increase in demand continued up to and past midnight on Christmas Eve, with Buckinghamshire Fire Service particularly dealing with multiple flooding incidents, specifically in the villages north of Milton Keynes, around Buckingham and in those surrounding areas. During the afternoon of Christmas Eve, 24th of December, it was apparent that Thames Valley Fire Control were very busy, as there were appliances all around the area of North Milton Keynes, Buckinghamshire and others, particularly areas such as Lavendon, Ravenstone, Tinjwick, Gorcott and Finmere. And many of the areas of focus were main roads where there were a significant number of cars stranded in rising water, with occupants unable to safely exit their cars unassisted. At one point during the evening, Control received a call every minute and dealt with around 320 incidents throughout the period. This service attended over 160 incidents, most of which were flood related. And during this period, there were a number of rescues from multiple properties. As you've just heard from Deputy Chief Officer Osborne, we have well-established relationships with local authorities, with emergency planning, and with wider agency partners. And we engage with them regularly on a range of activities, including our response to flooding emergencies. We engage in opportunities to learn, both internally and externally, through our operational assurance team. And we're able to share wider debriefing and learning activity with partners across Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes. The Thames Valley Local Resilience Forum arranged partner teleconferences and provided regular updates to partners on forecasts throughout the entire period. And this was pulled together with information from the Environment Agency and the Met Office, including predictions from a range of sources through the Christmas Eve period and through into the new year. The Local Resilience Forum intends to carry out a learning debrief towards the end of February, where local partner agencies will be invited to identify and address learning from this particular event. Undoubtedly, the flooding events had a variety of negative impacts on local communities. However, we have repeatedly ensured that necessary investment is available in equipment, training and capability in this service to ensure that we are able to respond appropriately to flooding incidents. And we keep these arrangements, as you would expect, under regular review. So I'm very happy to take any questions on that particular point at this stage.
Thank you very much indeed, Dave. I have Councillor McCall.
Thank you, Chairman. It was me that asked this item to go on the agenda, and I thank officers for the update and the briefing. Clearly, it was a major problem across, as you say, large areas, including Milton Keynes and my own ward in Newport Pagnell. I thank all the firefighters for the efforts done on the day. I just wanted to pick up a number of incidents. In my ward in particular, Priory Street was badly hit. And I wonder, first of all, there's been instances in past events where there's been information and data sharing between different agencies and partnership wasn't as perhaps good as it could be. Have those data sharing, information sharing issues in the past been resolved, and that we're now able to work with other agencies freely for the benefit of the residents that we all serve? Just some reassurance that those past problems are gone and we're not repeating past mistakes. And also, are there any other partner agencies that we need to perhaps ask as an authority whether they should be doing something else or reasons why they're not? In particular, I'm thinking of the Environment Agency. Myself and many of my residents, I'd be very frank, concerned and disappointed that the Environment Agency no longer dredges the rivers or desilts them, I think is the term they use. And obviously, if the riverbed hasn't got the capacity that it used to have, it can't hold as much water as it used to have. Therefore, that water overflows onto the surrounding area, and it could be one of the main reasons that Priory Street has flooded for the first time since Easter 1998. So I just wonder whether officers have got any thoughts on whether we as an authority should be asking the Environment Agency to dredge rivers, or at the very least explain to us why they don't do it anymore and thus increase the risk of flooding. That's two questions.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll take the first question first, if that's okay, in regarding relationships. So from our perspective, we remain in regular contact with our partners across the LRF and local authorities on a range of issues affecting the risk of the communities that we protect, including flooding. And I think it's fair to say, as I alluded to in the briefing, there will be a debriefing and learning event carried out through the Local Resilience Forum towards the end of February. And if there are any particular issues that arose during the floods at Christmas, then they will be identified and undoubtedly we will learn from them. And that's a practice that's well established through the service and with local authority partners. We do have an operational assurance team in service, and they regularly hold debrief on a range of incidents and bring that learning forward. And that informs any changes to operating practices that we run within service. We share that learning nationally through the National Operational Learning Forum and other forums which are available. And if that translates to new training practices and new equipment, new information sharing arrangements and new practices, then that's something that we do regularly update. In relation to the practices of the Environment Agency, I can't comment, as you would expect, on any changes they've made in their desilting arrangements. All I would say is again, that we continue to work with partners to understand changing risk in our communities. And if there are practices which are felt to impact directly on the way through which we respond to and protect our communities, then of course we would be involved in those discussions and we would make our representations. And that's something, again, we keep under regular review.
Could I just come back on those points, Chair, if I may?
Yes, you can.
Yeah, the first one was just to say that, and it may not be a problem now, but in the past, it's quite important for Milton Keynes Council to understand which properties have flooded. So when you're having your debrief, I think to make sure that that issue is covered. So that's quite important for Milton Keynes Council. With regard to Priory Street, the particular reason I'm raising that is that the drains feed directly, these are Victorian drains, feed directly into the river. So when the river is too high, the drains don't work, and therefore the street floods with the water coming up through the drains. So that's an issue for me. So if the Fire Authority does have any thoughts about that, perhaps you could feed them into this debrief that's happening in February, I think you said, because drains that don't work when it's rains heavily are as much use as a chocolate teapot, to be very frank. Thank you, Chair.
If you're not coming back on that, Dave, I'll ask Councillor Keith McLean to come in.
Thank you, Chair. If I could come back, I've made a note of Councillor McCall's comments, and of course I'll feed those into the debrief. Thank you.
Keith, do you want to ask a question?
Question and comments. Thank you, Chair. I ended up in Lavenden on the 23rd of December, having spoken to our emergency planning team, because I felt it was, if they wanted someone in the frozen north of the borough stroke, the area covered by Thames Valley Police and Bucks Fire and Rescue Service, I'd go. So I went there on the afternoon. I also went via Oney and down into Ravenstone during that time. Lavenden was, I've not experienced anything like it before, but when I got there, I found 3 of the Bucks and Milton Keynes Fire Service appliances there, which seemed a great benefit to the householders. There was another appliance that went through Lavenden. I don't think it was one of ours. I think it could have either been a Northants coming down to going into Bedfordshire, or Bedfordshire going home. They were very proactive towards helping the villages who'd got flooded. But one of the things that I've raised with Milton Keynes Council is the lack of sandbags that were available at the time that would have had some impact, but not greatly. We also had the Environmental Protection Unit turned up, and also the station officer from Oney, who unfortunately, as I know Des well, and I think you all know I know Des kind of well, was a bit upset that he couldn't get a crew out because there wasn't enough people to be able to man the appliance. I've got an idea how we might try and encourage a few more people to join up. But turning to the aftermath, the Water and Flood Management Group of Milton Keynes Council met on the 13th of January, I think. And this, of course, was discussed as one of the items. The Environmental Agency were there. The gentleman who was actually on the television last week, I think, Paul, I can't remember his surname, he made a comment. He said, "We're a bit short of revenue funds, but we've got quite a lot of capital." I thought, not the sort of thing you ought to say, because people will come knocking on your door very quickly. But what's happening in Milton Keynes, and I don't know whether Douglas is aware of this, is that there's going to be a Section 19 report produced under the Milton Keynes flood investigation policy, and there's a national piece of legislation, I can't remember what it is, it might actually be the Water and Flood Act, which is going to cover Lavenden, Ravenstone and Sherrington, plus Stony Stratford and Newport Pagnell. This report will be produced following investigation of the impact of the floods in December and what caused them, and taking Douglas's point, maybe old drains and rivers. After that, there'll be, on my understanding, there'll be some flood modelling and then the consultant and the separate set of consultants who are actually investigating what happened will recommend recommendations about future mitigation. I think the procurement of the first set of consultants is either just happened or is close to being finalised. So in terms of the LRF, there is also going to be something run from Milton Keynes Council. I would hope there's not going to be a duplication of effort, because that would be worrying, because perhaps wouldn't get the same story each time. But I would like to pay tribute to the crews who went to Lavenden. I managed to bypass the Thames Valley Control, because one of the crews, as they were packing up, I asked them to go over to Oney, where a place called Driftway was trying to be cleared by members of the public and 2 police officers who'd been there 4 hours. So thanks to the crew who went to Driftway and used their pump to just move the last bit of water out of a drain. Interesting, that's the first time I've seen one of those pumps with a basket on the bottom, a wicker basket. They had to bring it up and knock the debris off 3 times, which and that's a very, very new piece of road, and there isn't that much vegetation there. So thank you to Thames Valley Police for being there for 4 hours, and they were very grateful to Fire and Rescue for turning up and in 10 minutes finishing the job. I did write to Jason to thank him and hope that been passed on to the crews. And I think we just got to sit tight now and wait for the Section 19 reports that come in for all those areas, certainly within Milton Keynes. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Keith. I think the name you were searching for was Paul Burrows at the Environment Agency.
Correct,
Dave,
yes.
did you want to come back on any of that?
Thank you, Chair. There's some helpful points raised around sandbags, use of the Environmental Protection Unit and wider availability. We, as I mentioned previously, we're in contact with our colleagues in the Emergency Planning Department in Milton Keynes Council. And if there are the debriefs that you've mentioned, I'll ensure that as far as possible that they run concurrently and inform the Local Resilience Forum debrief. And of course, we would look to be involved as a partner, and we can offer our contributions to any future learning. So thank you for that, Chair.
I can see Jason has his hand up. Jason, do you want to come in?
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. Just to make the point, actually, in terms of identifying the risk, etc., prevention is always better than emergency response. So if we can help, if the fire authority can, or the fire service can help in any way in terms of the debriefs or in terms of any issues that need to be raised, I'm certainly happy to do it. Even if it's just down to this is how much it costs the fire and rescue service to respond to these incidents. Actually, there may be an opportunity to put in some prevention measures which would reduce this cost type of thing. We're happy to help if that's okay with councillors.
Thank you, Jason. Keith, I can see you again. Do you want to come back?
Yeah, I was just going to say that the lead officer in Milton Keynes Council for this is Nick Cannon, Head of Environment and Waste. And he has working with him a gentleman called Ashish Patel. I would hope that they would know about the LRF, and the director who handles that for Milton Keynes Council is Sarah Gonzalez. So if you want to reach out to, I suggest Nick Cannon in the first place, either Dave or Jason. And I'd just like to commend Jason on the backdrop he had when he was videos on. It's the largest attenuation lake I've seen.
It's the majestic Caldecott Lake, Mr. McLean, as you know. Superb.
It is a lovely lake, and it's in my ward, so I'm delighted to recommend Caldecott to anybody who wants some leisure activity during these difficult times. Can I just ask Dave a couple of questions myself? We've recently had a presentation on future Milton Keynes expansion around Newport Pagnell, Milton Keynes East as it's called, which includes the Ouzel Valley. I remain concerned that these 1 in 100-year events now are 1 in 100-day events, and therefore what input are we having into strategic planning in Milton Keynes and across the rest of Buckinghamshire and the Thames Valley, actually? Can I just ask, there is a flood risk management team. Can you just tell me who's represented on the flood risk management team? I think Keith has suggested who that is, but I'd just like to know more. Can I just inquire that the Bucks and Milton Keynes website, Fire Authority website, is updated and is current in terms of advice, guidance, etc. to residents, because I think residents will go to different areas to find advice, especially in an emergency. Fourthly, very quickly, I understand that from a purely legalistic perspective, our only duty is to rescue in terms of flooding, but I know we do a darn sight more than that. So, and that we're going above and beyond. And that leads me on to my very final point, is equipment. Do we have sufficient equipment within the Fire Authority, especially if we were pushed to go to 3 or 4 different parts of the area at one time? Do we have sufficient equipment to cover all those areas in an event of a major incident?
Okay, thanks, Chairman. So let me unpick some of those. In relation to the website, I will confirm that we do have up-to-date advice on the website. Certainly, we do keep the public regularly informed with ongoing incidents and information more widely, but I will check that in relation to floods. In relation to rescues, you're quite right. We don't have a statutory duty to have any statutory duty around flooding, but of course, we do respond to rescues. However, this service, in my view, has been very proactive in its response to flooding. You'll be aware that we have 2 boats in the service, one at Newport Pagnell and one at Beaconsfield. I understand both of those capabilities are registered on the National Flood Asset Register, which is held by DEFRA, and our crews are appropriately trained to maintain their position on that register. More widely, we have a wide area flooding capability on many of our fire stations, whereby crews can respond to relatively low level of moving water to be able to effect rescues and support communities more widely. So in relation to equipment, that's something that we would learn from the ongoing learning events. If there are new practices, if there is new equipment, if there are new ways of responding to flooding, then that's certainly something that we keep under regular review. But as we sit here, and certainly my understanding of our response to the events over Christmas, I'm satisfied that our training and our equipment are where it needs to be. And again, if that does need to change, that's something that we would discuss with members more widely. But of course, very happy to come back and brief members based on the outcomes of any learning events that are held and any changes in the services position, if that would be helpful.
Dave, thank you very much indeed. That's very reassuring. And can you pass on the thanks and best wishes of this committee to all the teams involved? We're very proud to be part of the solution to the recent flooding situation. If there's, Douglas, did you want to come back?
Yeah, just that final point. The LRF debrief is sometime in February, which i.e. this month. So perhaps you could come back to a future meeting and give us the main points from the debrief. I'm sure members would be very interested to hear the main points coming out of the debrief and any learning that we've learned from that. Because I know that Keith and myself in particular, our wards were quite badly affected during the Christmas floods. And of course, we've had several flooding events. And David was quite right that these 1 in 100 events are becoming quite regular. And I think that's why, as David knows, myself, I made a change to the 2050 strategy to get the issues of flooding sort of looked at seriously. And I think all future planning in Milton Keynes should assume a higher risk of flooding, in my view. But some feedback from the debrief at a future meeting would be very helpful and interesting. Thank you.
Of course, happy to bring that back, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Dave. And I'm sure we can minute that offer and that we'll look at this again in the not too distant future. I can see no other hands, so I'm going to go on now to agenda item 5, which is the budget monitoring report, April to November. And I understand that Laura Taylor is going to present. Laura, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm presenting the budget monitoring report as at the end of November 2020. Table 1 on page 17, Appendix A, provides an overview of each directorate's budget and forecast outturn. The current expenditure forecast 31.698 million against the budget of 31.339 million results in an overspend of 358,000. However, due to the additional funding of 847,000 received in year in relation to COVID, protection grants and airwave, we're seeing a net overall underspend of 489,000. Moving on to page 18, this provides a summary of variances being seen within each directorate. Corporate core is showing a £16,000 underspend, which is relating to underspends in legal costs and consultations with public, as well as courses and conference fees postponed due to COVID. This is offset by unachievable interest income on investments and additional audit fees not budgeted for. Finance and assets is showing an overspend of 48,000, which predominantly relates to West Ashland revenue costs, which will be expected to be partially covered by charges to SCAS and Thames Valley Police, not currently reflected in the forecast. This is offset by underspends relating to vacant positions within the directorate that have been now filled or recruitment delayed due to COVID. People and organizational development underspend of 69,000 mainly relates to underspend seen within employee costs. In addition to that, we're not expecting Thames Valley collaboration costs during the current financial year. Delivery, corporate development and planning is currently projecting £104,000 underspend. COVID response costs of 845,000 are reported within this directorate, and it's including the 230,000 that has been transferred to COVID-19 reserve as approved by the Executive Committee in September. This is offset by underspend seen within whole-time and on-call direct employee costs. And this is due to a number of whole-time positions not at the top of pay scales and employees being on 2015 pension schemes, which would see a lower contribution rate than the budgeted 1992 schemes. Statutory accounting and contingency overspend of 500,000 relates to additional revenue contribution to capital as approved by Executive Committee in September. Moving on to page 19, table 2. This shows the breakdown of favourable and adverse variances relating to direct employee objectives. Higher underspends are shown under on-call, relating to activity and training costs, and underspend seen within support staff are due to delays in recruitment caused by COVID. Moving on to page 20, table 3. This table shows the spend in relation to COVID pandemic and how we're utilising the COVID funding of 606,000 allocated for the current financial year 2020-21. Funding, table 4 on page 21, shows additional 847,000 funding for the current financial year, 606,000 for COVID, 230,000 for protection, and 11,000 for additional funding relating to airwave. Finally, moving on to capital, which is table 5 on page 22. Most of the capital works are related to West Ashland. As per the note in report, the forecasted year-end variances for property review, 2.686 million, is expected to be offset by additional capital receipts and contributions, which will result in a net variance of around 1 million against the forecast expenditure. That is it from me. If you have any questions or comments, thank you.
I can't see any hands at the moment, so I have a quick question, Laura, if I may. Can you just tell us what the latest position is in terms of forecast COVID-19 costs and the use of funding, given that the forecast noted is to the end of November, and obviously quite a lot has happened since then?
Indeed, Asif wants to come in because I know you've been working recently on these figures. Thank you.
Thank you.
Come in, Asif.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, we've recently been looking at our spend for COVID, and as you noted, that forecast was at the end of November. Having done a more recent forecast, it looks like we will be spending the full allocation. So we were actually given two sets of allocation. We were given 90k last March, and then we were given 606k this financial year. So in total, we've received 696k, and our current projections show that actually we're pretty much going to spend all of it. Following on from that, the government have made available another tranche of funding for COVID if we are going to be able to utilize our existing funding. So I've got together and collated all the figures. As things currently stand, we are looking to do a bid in the region of around 140k, which is predominantly due to the support we've given to SCAS. where some of our operational staff have been seconded to drive the gas ambulances, and secondly, the support we've given to the mass vaccination. Now, none of those costs are covered in our existing allocation of funding, so we are looking to access some of that additional funding that's been made available.
Thank you, Asif. That's very clear. I'm sure you'll keep us all informed as that moves forward. Councillor McLean.
Thank you, Chair. My question relates to the property portfolio and West Ashland. Just looking at the figures, and thank you for Laura for the explanation and for the paper. At the back of my mind, I recall in the early days of the project that there was a concern about one of the professional teams that were involved in the project, and there was talk of going to try and get some of the fees returned to us because they were not they hadn't performed in a professional manner. Did that actually occur, and is that taken into account in the overall spend on West Ashland?
So, Chairman, if I may, can I comment on that one?
Yes, you do, please.
Yeah, so it's a good point, and that is still being looked at, Councillor. So at the moment, we're still working on finalising the final account. It's taken slightly longer than we would have hoped to. Part of that reason has been COVID and additional work and complexity of finalising those figures. Once we have a final position on the final account, we will then look at the possibility of the amount we could potentially recover from the professional team in terms of delays caused by design costs, design problems, etc. So that is still to be investigated over the coming months, and we'll keep members up to date on progress with that.
That's fine. Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you, Chair. That's reassuring. There's still an opportunity. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Keith. I can see no other hands unless anybody wants to shout. In which case, we'll go to the recommendation, which is on page 15. The recommendation is that the latest projected outturn forecast for the authority as at 30th of November 2020 be noted. Is that agreed?
Chairman, no member has indicated a wish to vote against or abstain.
Therefore, that is agreed. Thank you, Graham. Can we move on then to agenda item 6, which is the prudential code, prudential indicators and minimum revenue provision. Asif, this is your time to star again.
Thank you, Chairman. I must stress this is a technical paper that we present every year, and in essence, it's us putting money aside in order to pay our long-term debt. As things currently stand, we have set aside 47k, which we have done for the previous years, in order to set aside the level of funds to pay off our debt. We currently do have a set of money that we have got sufficient revenue provision to cover it, but due to the repayment and the penalties involved in repaying that debt early, it's currently not an option. The authority has no plans to carry out any additional borrowing in the foreseeable future in accordance to our current MTFP. I wasn't going to touch too much on it, but just to stress that the 47k is no different to what we've set aside in previous years, and we would look to do the same again this financial year.
Thank you very much indeed. Does anybody wish to contribute, ask a question? Can I just very quickly, just from a technical perspective, what is the benefit, Asif, of having previously made this sufficient revenue provision?
Yep, this revenue provision was made around in accordance to our efficiency plan. So back in 2015-16, we wanted to, I believe, identify potential savings in our revenue budget. So by setting aside this set of fund, it then means that we don't have to allocate in the region of around $250,000 every year for our minimum revenue position. So as I stated earlier, because we've set these funds aside, our minimum revenue position stands at 47k. If we hadn't set those funds aside, we'd be probably looking at $250,000 minimum revenue position every year, which would have a direct impact on our revenue budget every year.
Thank you very much indeed. That's helpful. I can see no other hands. Does anybody wants to shout? They don't, in which case we have a recommendation on page 25 that the Executive Committee approve the recommendations below for submission to the FAR Authority, that the authority be recommended to approve 1, the prudential indicators for 2021-22, and 2, the minimum revenue provision policy statement. Is that agreed?
Chairman, no member has indicated a wish to vote against or abstain. The resolution is carried.
Thank you very much indeed. We'll move on then to agenda item 7, the financial medium-term financial plan, MTFP 2021-22 to 25-26. Asif, I hope we paid you well.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The main report in Annex A presents the proposed revenue and capital medium-term financial plan for the financial years 2021 to 2025-26. The MTFP is closely linked to the financial strategy, which was approved in December 2020, which is a link between the organisation's long-term service objectives and its financial capacity. The final settlement by local government was announced last week. Within the settlement, it has been confirmed that authorities without any specific council tax freedoms can increase their council tax by up to 1.99% without the need for a referendum. Therefore, our assumptions also assume and recommend that we increase our council tax Band D precept by 1.99%. We have also seen a reduction in our council tax base by 0.65%. Just to give you a comparison, in previous years, we have seen our council tax base increase in the region of around 1.5% to 2%. This has resulted in a net reduction of at least 2% of what we would have expected without the impact of the pandemic. To counter some of this reduction, the government have announced an additional 670 million unring-fenced grant, which will be distributed to the authorities in recognition of the increased costs of providing local council tax support following the COVID-19 pandemic. Buckinghamshire Fire and Rescue Service will receive in the region of 336k, which has been reflected in our projections under the heading Council Tax Support Grant. Business rates this year have proven really difficult to estimate. Indicative figures provided by billing authorities earlier in the year suggested a reduction in the region of 8%. This was indicative, and billing authorities had until the 31st of January to finalise these figures. Since the 31st of January, we have been provided with an update from Milton Keynes and also an indicative figures from Buckinghamshire Council, which I will touch on a bit later on. In terms of central government funding, due to the pressures caused by the pandemic on government resources, the government has effectively rolled forward amounts within the settlement funding assessment for 2021 and increased these by the rate of inflation as at September 2020. The exception to this is the pension grant funding, which is a flat cash settlement and expected to be included in future years' settlement funding assessment and subject to review as part of the anticipated 3-year comprehensive spending review. Uncertainty also persists regarding the pensions following the Sergeant ruling in December 2018 that the transitional arrangements introduced for the firefighters pension scheme in 2015 were discriminatory. At the Employment Tribunal hearing on 18 December 2019, it was ruled that the claimants, members of the 1992 and 2006 firefighters pension scheme, are now entitled to be treated as if they had remained members of the original pension scheme. It's expected that this will increase the long-term costs of the firefighter pension schemes, although it is not yet possible to quantify the impact. In terms of our MTFP process this year, we reverted back to our incremental budgeting approach when developing the budget proposal for 2021-22. With the projected reductions in council tax base and business rates funding, budgeting process was scrutinised by officers and members to ensure only proposals which added value for money were approved. Even with the budgetary constraints, this year's budget approach has identified some key opportunities, some of which are the development of a leadership and management framework, continuation of a health and safety member of staff in order to support the pandemic response, and upgrade of our ICT infrastructure, in particular the wide area and local area network. As well as opportunities, the MTFP projections have had to be revised following the comprehensive spending review announcement. As part of the one-year CSR, the government announced public sector pay increases to be paused, excluding NHS and those earning less than 24,000. Therefore, no pay award has been built into the 2021-22 budget for anyone earning more than 24,000. If I can now share my screen and take you to the revised Appendix 1, which shows our latest position and is a change from what has been presented to members in the pack. Just checking that everyone can see that on the screen.
Yes, we can see it, Asif.
Okay, excellent. So in terms of the revised appendix, I must stress that this was indicative figures that were provided by Buckinghamshire Council. Based on what I'm presenting here, we assumed that actually we would overall improve our financial funding position by a further 10k. So our reserves here, we wouldn't be utilizing 904k, it would actually reduce down to 894k. However, since producing this revised appendix, colleagues at Buckinghamshire Council have struggled to finalise the NNDR and had asked for an extension this year with MHCLG purely because they're still operating on 4 different financial systems. And as of today, we have received a revised NNDR1, which will again change the revised position that I'm presenting today. It was only sent this morning and it's been revised following review from the senior management. I've not had a chance to kind of look at the detail, and early assumptions would suggest that potentially our NNDR funding here, business rates funding here, may reduce by further 200k, and that would be a worst case scenario, but I do need a bit of time to go through it, and we'll be updating members at the Fire Authority next week. I was going to leave it at that. Was there any questions?
No, thank you very much indeed for that, Asif. Can I just ask, maybe Graham, that you might like to advise on this, on the basis that we do have ever-changing figures. We have a recommendation which is on page 37, which we'll come to a bit later. Do we need to revise that recommendation slightly, just to take into account that Asif will be presenting a revision of the revision over the next few days?
Thank you, Chairman. Looking at the recommendations, I think they're broad enough to encapsulate any last-minute finessing, and ultimately, it's a decision reserved by a meeting of the full authority. So I don't see anything in the recommendations that offend the presentation that you've received this morning. But as if indicated, if there are any changes that need to be reported to the full authority, they will be taken into account and again reflected in the Chief Finance Officer's report to the authority next week.
Thank you, Graham. That's very clear. Are there any questions or comments? Keith.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Asif, for going through that. In the papers on page 36, the top paragraph that flows from the executive summary, it states that in addition to this, the government will also fund 75% of irrecoverable collection fund losses due to COVID-19. Just my understanding, I think from what you just said, if Buckingham Council and Milton Keynes Council failed to collect £200,000, does that mean that 150,000 would still be provided by the government to cover that loss, but we'd have to stand the 50,000, which is the 25%? Is that my understanding correct?
Yes, you're correct in the sense that there is an element of 75% recoverable, but there is a strict criteria in terms of what is recoverable. So there's elements that are recoverable, and then there's elements that are not. In terms of business rates, there is an element of support where they will allocate 75% of it, but we need to understand what that 200k difference is. Does that fit into that category of recovering the 75%? I've not had the chance yet to look into the detail But there is, you are right, there is an element of 75% that will be recovered. Doesn't necessarily mean the figure that I'm reporting today of 200k that we will get 75%. Until I've kind of done my due diligence and looked into the numbers in a bit more detail, I'll be able to share a response on that. But as things currently stand, I am trying to give the kind of worst case scenario. In terms of just generally, yes, the argument from kind of central government is that, or the support that they will be giving is that any uncollected rates and stuff, they will support by 75%. I need to just check that if these fit under that criteria or not. And at the moment, it's too early for me to say yes or no, just because I've only been given the revised NNDR this morning, just before the meeting went live.
I didn't. The 200k actually was plucked out of my mind just as an example of, because I can do the maths quickly on it. But I do take your point, and I'm not surprised. It's quite complicated, and I think, as David Hopkins mentioned, it's actually quite dynamic in the true sense of the word. It is changing probably by the day and even the hour. So thank you for the explanation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Keith. I can see no other hands, in which case we'll move to the recommendation, which is on page 37. It is recommended the authority be recommended to, it's also recommended, 1A, note and have due regard to the report and statement of the Chief Financial Officer, see Section 8 of Annex A. 1B, approve a council tax precept of £67.16 for a Band D equivalent property, a 1.99% increase from 2020-21, equal to 2.5p per week, and the revenue budget as set out in Appendix 1. 1C, approve the capital programme as set out in Appendix 2. 2, not hold a referendum to increase council tax above the 2% threshold for 2021-22. And number 3, note that a referendum may need to be considered for 2022-23, depending on the outcome of the comprehensive spending review. Can I ask if any member wishes to vote against or abstain from this recommendation?
Chairman, there's an indication that Chief Officer Thel wishes to speak, I think, before it goes to the vote.
I'm grateful to you, Graham. Jason.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I think the recommendation 3 is very clear, but I just wanted to make the point that we are not recommending a referendum be held this year, just that we consider it for next year. But there is no decision been taken on that, and we're not recommending that we take one next year either. We'll just look at it depending upon the outcome of the comprehensive spending review.
I think Gordon Brown's old friend prudence has come to the fore here, and I could not agree more. I think it's just common sense. Right, in which case I refer to what I said before. Does any member wish to vote against or abstain from the recommendation?
Chairman, no member has indicated a wish to vote against or abstain. The resolution is carried.
Excellent. We shall move on then to agenda item 8, response to the Provisional Local Government Finance Settlement 2021-22. Consultation paper. Mark Hemming, own your cross.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, members. So this paper is to bring to members' attention for noting our response to the Provisional Local Government Finance Settlement consultation. So the provisional settlement was published on the 17th of December 2020, and it was a 4-week consultation period ending on the 16th of January this year. Therefore, due to the timescales, a response was agreed with the chairman and the lead member for finance, and this paper is now for noting by the committee. In terms of our response, we focused solely on question 2, which was seeking views on the council tax referendum principles, and specifically for us relating to fire authorities. So we made a representation that, given issues raised by HMIC FRS in regards to our funding, and also issues related to COVID and some of the issues as I've touched on earlier, that we believe that fire authorities should have the flexibility to increase their council tax by up to £5 without having to trigger a referendum. Unfortunately, given the final settlements laid last week, there was no provision for that increase. And as I said earlier, we're still restricted by amounts of up to 1.99% increases in council tax. I'm happy to take any questions that members may have on this document.
Just so I'm absolutely clear, you might have mentioned this, Mark. So has there been a response to our previous letter to the Fire Minister?
Yeah, so the group leaders sent a joint letter in, I think, middle of December. We had a response at the end of last week. It was kind of basically saying there's no opportunity for any flexibility and that they would like to meet officials to discuss other ways that we can look at meeting our reduced funding besides increased flexibility in council tax. So probably not the response that we were hoping for, but we will engage positively with officials from the Home Office to explain our financial situation and see if there's anything else we can do to help.
Can I ask if anybody wants to comment or ask a question? I can't see any hands, in which case I think we will move, if we're all agreed, yep, I think we will move to the recommendation, which is on page 53, that the response to the consultation be noted. Does any member wish to vote against or abstain to this recommendation?
Chairman, no member has indicated a wish to vote against or abstain. The resolution is carried.
Thank you very much indeed, Graham. Can we move then to agenda item number 9, which is members' allowances? Graham, your time.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, members. This is a perennial item and is presented for recommendation by this committee to the full authority meeting on the 17th of February. As a standalone fire and rescue authority, the authority has a wide discretion in adopting an annual scheme of allowances. The only proviso is that the authority must have regard to the recommendations of the independent remuneration panels of its 2 constituent councils, and these are appended as appendices A and B to my cover report. The proposed scheme of allowances for the year 2021 to 22 is appended as Appendix C and is based on a 0% increase from the current financial year. As set out in the executive summary of the cover report, which is at page 89 in your agenda packs, the scheme of allowances has been linked to the NJC annual pay award for firefighters since 2012-13. The recommendation is that this indexation be suspended for 2021-22 rather than apply the 2% increase. There are no other changes proposed in the annual scheme.
Have you concluded, Graham, or are you? Oh, no.
Forgive me, members, it was a regular fire alarm. There's no need to evacuate. There are no other changes proposed to the annual scheme. Unless I can assist further, the recommendation is at page 89.
Thank you very much indeed. Are there any questions or comments from anybody? Can't see any hands yet. In which case, the recommendation is that the authority be recommended to adopt a scheme for members' allowances for 2021-22 as set out in Appendix C. Does any member wish to vote against or abstain?
Chairman, no member has indicated a wish to vote against or abstain. The resolution is carried.
Thank you very much indeed. We move on to agenda item 10. Emergency Services Mobile Communications Programme, ESMCP, which is run slightly longer than Coronation Street. Marie, can you give us an update?
I can, thank you, Chairman. Good morning, everyone. My previous ESMCP updates have tended to concentrate on the publication of the full business case, which has been delayed again. So for this paper, I decided to focus on other programme activities that have been taking place. Key areas of note on this are as follows. There has been some movement regarding the provision of a direct network provider or DNSP link into BR4S. This is the link that will give us direct access into the emergency services network from our headquarters site. The regional programme manager for the East Midlands has collated the issues raised by all regions and has passed them on to the programme technical lead for further discussion. And we hope to see some progress on that soon. We've now received 2 ESN devices, a vehicle device that's been passed to Thames Valley Police for installation into their vehicles for road testing, and a handheld device which we will retain for our own walk testing of knot spots and buildings. We've now received full training on the operation of the handheld device and the interrogation of the predicted coverage portal and the methods in which to raise areas of concern. Some time ago, I provided the programme with a list of sites within the Bucks area and Milton Keynes area that require coverage at all times. These are known as critical operational locations, or COLs, and these are reviewed periodically and updated. Some large pieces of work have been passed to services for completion with regard to the coverage assurance testing, and these relate to resilience requirements at our listed COLs and assurance testing of our Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes fire service areas. Both these pieces of work will be labour intensive and will require allocation of resource to carry out walk testing and building testing as issues are identified through the portal. One development that's been causing us some concern is the recruitment of a regional programme manager for the South Central region. A recruitment campaign took place in October-November of last year, and 2 candidates were offered the role. Unfortunately, neither of them decided to accept, and we're now in a position where we were running a further campaign. However, the remaining candidate in this process has this week withdrawn due to family sickness. The contract to provide an RPM by Mott MacDonald for the South Central region finished on the 15th of January, and the role is currently being shared by the 3 project managers from the South Central region. This will continue to the end of March, when it will be reviewed, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Marie. Are there any questions or comments from any members? Keith.
Thank you, Chairman. Just for the record, Coronation Street has been going a long time. I worked for Granada Television. I went to the 25th birthday party in 1985. Marie, you picked up the main point I wanted to make about the programme manager, in the sense that I was concerned that 2 people had been offered the role, had turned it down. The third one I could understand if it was family sickness. But why was such a role they applied and then were offered and it turned down? What was the reason that 2 people turned down the role? It just worries me. It's not quite something I'm used to.
Okay, so the first person that we offered the role to wasn't happy with the scale, the salary scale that we were offering. That scale was made clear to him before the recruitment took place, yet he still decided to apply for it. He was actually in another role and is currently under a consultation situation within his current role, so maybe that's why he decided to apply, but then he decided that the salary wasn't enough. The second person had been offered an alternative role, and when we went back to him to offer him this role, he said no, he was going to stick with the first role. So that's where we are. We had 3 applicants for the role this time, and we only decided to take 1 through to the next stage, and unfortunately he was due to be interviewed today and he withdrew on Monday. We don't think that this is peculiar to the South Central region. We know that other regions have had difficulty in recruiting into these roles. I think on the face of it, they look like they're very specialist type roles, and possibly the salary scale isn't seen as enough. However, it is definitely in line with the other regions. And what we see is that a lot of the RPMs in other regions tend to be ex-fire service or existing fire service personnel that have been seconded. So that's why the external arena may look at it as a specialist type role.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Just a general comment. I was actually quite pleased with this report compared to the previous one. I think there seems to be more progress, less risk going forward, which is a really good thing, because I think about 6 to 9 months ago when we were presented with reports, then it looked like it was a bag of worms, and it was we were never going to get there before the other system was turned off. But I do feel a bit more comforted with what you said, Marie, and in the report, so thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yes, Marie, I would echo those comments from Keith, and fingers crossed we can get this moving. Is it, do you think, the nature of the role, which is short term, although the way the project's been going, it's a job for life, but is this technically a short term role? Are people put off by that, do you think? And can we offer some hope of moving on to other activity once the project is completed?
I think this role is subject to funding, so government funding. So yes, we could recruit, and we could recruit on a 4 or 5 year basis, because that might be what it takes to get this project over the line. However, we don't know what the funding is going forward that far, so we are restricted by the government funding that we get for the length of time that we get it. So we can't predict that far ahead.
I completely understand. Are there any other members who have questions or comments? I can see no other hands. We have a recommendation on page 135. Members are recommended to note the ESMCP update. Can I ask you if any member wishes to vote against or abstain? Can you let us know?
Chairman, no member has indicated a wish to vote against or abstain. The resolution is carried.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Marie. I now need to announce that by reason of the need to put contingency arrangements in place and to coordinate with the other Thames Valley Fire and Rescue Authorities governance arrangements, that the following item should be considered as a matter of urgency. This is a late paper which came out as it's item 10A. And this is Principal Officers COVID-19 arrangements between the Thames Valley Fire and Rescue Authorities. Graham, you're leading on.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, members. The unique challenge presented by the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic creates risks to the 3 Thames Valley Fire and Rescue Authorities in being able to ensure that their response functions remain intact and undiminished in the event of the reduced availability of a cadre of their principal officers due to illness or self-isolation arising from COVID-19. The recommendation that the committee is being asked to endorse is to agree the principles of a principal officer sharing agreement in the terms set out in Appendix A to my cover report. A report and draft agreement in identical terms was presented to the Royal Berkshire Fire Authority last Wednesday, and agreed unanimously. And a decision by the portfolio holder at Oxfordshire County Council is expected to follow shortly. To my knowledge, this will be the first such agreement in the country and builds upon the successes of the single mobilising function provided by the Thames Valley Fire Control Service for the 3 Thames Valley Fire and Rescue Services. The crux of the arrangement is set out in clause 3.1 of the agreement, and the details of how principal officers would be mobilised will be set out in protocols to be agreed between the chief fire officers. Unless I can assist further, the recommendation is on the front of the sheet of the late urgent item. Thank you, Chairman.
Are there any questions or comments, please, from members? I can see no hands. You can shout if you need to. No. In which case, can we move then to the recommendation, which is contained within the later paper. The agreement at Annex A, subject to any minor amendments required for completion by the 3 participating Thames Valley Fire and Rescue Authorities, be approved for sealing. Can I ask if any member wishes to vote against or abstain to that recommendation?
Chairman, no member has indicated a wish to vote against or abstain. The resolution is carried.
Thank you, Graham. Can we move then now to agenda item 13, please, which is the date of the next meeting? Can we note that the next meeting of the Executive Committee will be held on Wednesday, the 24th of March, 2021 at 10 a.m. Can I then move to agenda item 11, exclusion of the press and public? Can I ask the Director of Legal and Governance to recommend the exclusion of the press and public in order for the exempt minutes to be considered? Graham.
Thank you, Chairman, members. The recommendation is that the public and press be excluded from the meeting by virtue of paragraph 1 of Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972 as the minutes contain information relating to individuals, and paragraph 3 of Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972, as the minutes contain information relating to the financial or business affairs of a person, including the authority. And on these grounds, it is considered at this moment in time that the need to keep the information exempt outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. Chairman, that's the recommendation. I'll invite any member that wishes to abstain or vote against to indicate. Chairman, no member has indicated a wish to abstain or vote against the recommendation. The recommendation or the resolution is carried. We will just pause for a moment to get. Oops.
The benefit of viewers of the webcast that the meeting will now go into private session. I'm told to do so by this piece of paper you gave me. So.